Michelle Knight's nightmare began on August 23, 2002 in Cleveland, Ohio. At 21 years old, she was on her way to a court hearing about regaining custody of her son, when Ariel Castro, a man she vaguely knew through his daughter, offered her a ride. She accepted, believing she could trust him. Instead, Castro lured her into his house on Seymour Avenue, the same home where he would later imprison Amanda Berry and Gina DeJesus. Michelle was the first, and for over a year, she was his only captive. Castro immediately chained her in an upstairs bedroom. Unlike Amanda and Gina, Michelle was never allowed small privileges. She was starved, forced to eat rotten food, and beaten so severely that her hearing was permanently damaged. Castro also forced her to help deliver Amanda Berry's child in 2006, threatening to kill her if the baby did not survive. Michelle later revealed that she suffered multiple forced miscarriages due to Castro's assaults and starvation. When Amanda finally escaped on May 6, 2013, and police entered the house, Michelle was found emaciated, weighing barely 40 kilograms. She had been held prisoner for 11 years, longer than either Amanda or Gina. While Amanda and Gina were reunited with their families, Michelle faced another tragedy. Her family had presumed her dead and moved on. She later said, "Nobody was there for me, but I was there for myself, and I survived." In 2014, she legally changed her name to Lily Rose Lee and began rebuilding her life. She published her memoir, Finding Me, describing in detail the beatings, starvation, and psychological torture that went far beyond what was first reported. Her resilience made her not only a survivor, but also the most tragic and overlooked victim of the Cleveland kidnappings, the woman who endured the longest and suffered the most. In May 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan was hitchhiking from Oregon to California. She accepted a ride from Cameron and Janice Hooker, believing them to be an ordinary couple. Hours later, Cameron pulled off the road, threatened her with a knife, and locked a homemade wooden box over her head. For the next 7 years, Colleen lived in captivity in their Red Bluff, California home. She was forced to spend up to 23 hours a day inside a coffin-like wooden box under their bed. The Hookers brainwashed her with stories of a secret organization called The Company, which they claimed would kill her and her family if she tried to escape. Cameron used her for slave labor and sexual abuse, while Janice played a complex role, both accomplice and eventual whistleblower. In public, Colleen was occasionally allowed to visit her family, but fear kept her silent. Her parents recalled that she seemed nervous but believed her explanation that she had joined a religious group. Finally, in 1984, Janice confessed the truth to a pastor, who urged her to alert police. Colleen was freed, and Cameron Hooker was sentenced to 104 years in prison. Colleen later revealed she had trained herself to go elsewhere in her mind to survive, calling her ordeal life in a box. On June 5, 2002, in the upscale Federal Heights neighborhood of Salt Lake City, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was taken from her own bed at knife point. It was around 2 a.m. when Brian David Mitchell, a 49-year-old homeless handyman who had once worked briefly at the Smart home, broke in through a kitchen window. Armed with a knife, he woke Elizabeth and whispered that if she made a sound, he would kill her family sleeping nearby. Terrified, she followed him out of the house, barefoot and in her pajamas. Mitchell's wife, Wanda Barzee, waited in a hidden camp high in the Wasatch Mountains, just 4 miles from Elizabeth's home. There, they began what became 9 months of captivity. Mitchell forced Elizabeth to wear thick robes and a veil that covered her face, making her nearly impossible to recognize in public. He gave her a new name, Shir Jashub, taken from the Bible, and presented himself as her husband. Elizabeth later revealed that she was chained to a cable between 2 trees and kept in isolation for weeks at a time. Mitchell and Barzee controlled every aspect of her life: when she ate, when she slept, when she could move. This psychological control kept her silent, even in situations where escape seemed possible. What makes this case even more shocking is how visible Elizabeth sometimes was. Mitchell and Barzee brought her out in public multiple times. In September 2002, just 3 months after her disappearance, they were stopped by a Salt Lake police detective while walking downtown. Elizabeth stood only a few feet away, but she was hidden under a heavy veil, and Mitchell claimed she was his daughter. The officer believed him and let them go. Elizabeth later said she wanted to scream, but fear of Mitchell's threats froze her. During captivity, Elizabeth was forced to live a bizarre and isolated lifestyle. Mitchell made her fast for long periods, sing hymns, and listen to his long religious sermons. In one incredible twist, the captors even took her to a public party where dozens of people saw her, but none recognized her beneath the veil. Elizabeth later described the feeling as being erased, existing in plain sight but unseen. Her break came on March 12, 2003. Mitchell, Barzee, and Elizabeth had moved to Sandy, Utah, 18 miles from her home. They were walking down State Street when several people noticed the trio looked suspicious. Elizabeth's strange clothing drew attention, and one witness thought she matched the missing girl from the news. Police quickly surrounded them. At first, Mitchell tried to claim Elizabeth was his daughter. Officers pressed her gently, asking direct questions. Elizabeth stayed silent at first, terrified Mitchell would follow through on his threats. Finally, she whispered, "I am Elizabeth Smart." After Elizabeth's dramatic rescue in March 2003, both Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee were immediately arrested, but their legal cases did not move quickly. Mitchell spent years in court while judges debated whether he was mentally competent to stand trial. He often shouted in court and claimed to be a prophet, which delayed the process. Finally, in December 2010, a jury found him guilty of kidnapping and transporting a minor across state lines. In 2011, he was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently held at a high-security prison in Tucson, Arizona. Barzee's case moved faster. In 2009, she pleaded guilty to federal charges of aiding in the kidnapping. She was sentenced to 15 years, with credit for the years she had already served since her 2003 arrest. That meant she served the full sentence and was released in September 2018. Her release sparked widespread outrage. Elizabeth Smart herself publicly condemned the decision, saying Barzee had refused mental health treatment in prison and still posed a threat to society. Elizabeth did not disappear into anonymity. Instead, she became an outspoken advocate for child safety, internet protection laws, and missing persons. She testified before Congress, helped push through the National Amber Alert System expansions, and founded the Elizabeth Smart Foundation. She also authored 2 books, My Story and Where There's Hope, detailing both her ordeal and her path to recovery. On June 10, 1991 in California, 11-year-old Jaycee Lee Dugard was walking to her school bus when Philip Garrido and his wife Nancy stopped their car. Philip shocked her with a taser, and together they forced her inside. For the next 18 years, Jaycee vanished into the Garridos' backyard compound in Antioch, California, concealed behind fences, tarps, and sheds that neighbors never questioned. Life there was harsh and tightly controlled. Jaycee lived in tents and small shacks, cut off from the outside world. At just 14, she became a mother, and later had a second child. Against all odds, she raised both girls in captivity, teaching them to read, write, and even garden in the small patch of ground she was allowed. Nancy played an active role, bringing food, enforcing rules, and helping keep the secret for nearly 2 decades. Philip grew increasingly unstable, claiming he heard voices of angels guiding him, while Jaycee survived by focusing on her daughters, making them her reason to keep going. The break finally came in August 2009. Philip brought Jaycee and the girls to a parole meeting at UC Berkeley. Suspicious campus officers noticed something was off and alerted parole agents. Questioned further, Jaycee at last revealed her true name, ending 18 years of silence. The discovery shocked the nation. Philip Garrido was sentenced to 431 years in prison, while Nancy received 36 years to life. In 2011, Jaycee released her memoir, A Stolen Life, recounting the strange routines of captivity and her journey back to freedom. On October 6, 2002, 11-year-old Sean Hornbeck disappeared while riding his bike near his Missouri home. His abductor, Michael Devlin, a pizza shop manager, lured him with a gun. For the next 4 years, Sean lived under Devlin's control. Unlike many captivity cases, Sean was not chained. Instead, he was psychologically manipulated. Devlin allowed him to play outside, surf the internet, and even interact with neighbors under a fake name. Some questioned why Sean didn't run, but experts later explained he had been groomed, threatened, and brainwashed. Devlin alternated threats with limited freedoms, creating compliance under duress. Some observers called it Stockholm Syndrome, but experts explained it was closer to learned helplessness. On January 12, 2007, police searched Devlin's apartment in Kirkwood, Missouri. Inside, they found Ben alive after 4 days missing. But the greater shock was the second boy sitting quietly in the apartment, Sean Hornbeck, missing for more than 4 years. The media called it the Missouri Miracle. Sean later explained why he hadn't escaped. Devlin repeatedly threatened to kill his family if he tried. Experts described his situation as a combination of coercive control, trauma bonding, and learned helplessness, psychological chains as effective as physical ones. Devlin pleaded guilty to multiple charges and received 74 life sentences, ensuring he will never be released. On December 4, 1972, in Merced, California, 7-year-old Stephen Stainer was walking home from school when Kenneth Parnell lured him into his car. Parnell told Stephen his parents no longer wanted him and raised him as his son for 7 years. Stephen, renamed Dennis, attended school, made friends, and lived in a strange half-life of captivity. When Parnell kidnapped another boy, 5-year-old Timmy White, Stephen finally acted. On March 1, 1980, he fled with Timmy, walking into a police station in Ukiah and told officers, "My name is Stephen." The case made headlines worldwide and later inspired the miniseries, I Know My First Name is Stephen. Parnell was convicted, but served only 5 years. Stephen struggled to adjust to freedom, and in 1989, at just 24 years old, he died in a motorcycle accident. His act of bravery, however, saved Timmy and exposed his captor. Years later, Timmy became a sheriff's deputy, but tragically died in 2010 at just 35 from a pulmonary embolism. On June 24, 2002, in Columbia, South Carolina, 15-year-old Kara Robinson was watering plants outside her friend's home when a stranger pulled up in a Pontiac Firebird. The man, 38-year-old Richard Mark Evanitz, approached her politely at first, asking if her parents were home. Within seconds, he pulled a gun, forced her into a large plastic storage container in his car, and drove away. Evanitz was not just a random attacker. Police would later learn he was a serial predator already linked to the abductions and murders of at least 3 young girls in Virginia during the 1990s. Sophia Silva and sisters Kristen and Cotty Lisk. Those cases had gone cold for years. Kara was unknowingly facing the same man investigators had been hunting. Once at his apartment, Evanitz bound Kara and kept her under his control. Most victims in such situations panic, but Kara did something different. She stayed calm, treating the ordeal like a mission. While appearing compliant, she studied everything around her: the color of the carpet, the location of doors, serial numbers on appliances, phone numbers on bills, even brand names on pill bottles. She later said she knew if she survived, her memory could bring him down. After 18 tense hours, when Evanitz fell asleep on his bed, Kara quietly freed herself, slipped out the door, and sprinted barefoot across the street to safety. She reached a neighbor's home and immediately gave police a detailed account of the apartment. Her descriptions were so precise that investigators located the complex within hours. When police moved in, Evanitz fled across state lines. A high-speed chase unfolded in Florida. Cornered, Evanitz killed himself before capture. In his car and apartment, investigators found evidence tying him to the long-unsolved Virginia murders. Kara's survival and quick thinking had not only saved her life, it solved multiple cold cases that had haunted families for years. For her help in solving the murders of Sophia and the Lisk sisters, Kara received $150,000 in reward money and was able to meet their families. Today, Kara Robinson Chamberlain speaks publicly about survival tactics, resilience, and trauma recovery. On May 16, 1980, in Roseville, Minnesota, schoolteacher Mary Stauffer and her 8-year-old daughter Beth were abducted at gunpoint by Ming-Sen Xue, a former student who had become dangerously obsessed with her. Xue had first met Mary when he was 15 years old, and for years he fantasized about her. even writing in journals that he would one day kidnap her. That day, he forced Mary and Beth into his car and drove them to his home in Columbia Heights. There, he locked them inside a small closet, measuring barely 2 feet wide, where they remained prisoners for 53 days. Shue repeatedly threatened them and forced them to obey his rules under constant fear of death. During the ordeal, Shue also kidnapped 6-year-old Jason Wilkman, who had seen him with Mary and Beth near a local park. Tragically, Shue decided Jason was a liability and killed him in a remote wildlife area. Jason's death added another layer of horror to the case, and his remains were later recovered, confirming Mary's testimony about what had happened. Inside the closet, Mary tried to shield Beth from the trauma by turning captivity into school. She taught her Bible verses, sang songs, and gave her math problems, using mental strength to keep her daughter's hope alive. Finally, on July 7, 1980, Mary saw her chance. When Shue left them loosely restrained, she worked herself free, escaped with Beth, and ran for help. Police arrested Shue shortly after. At trial, evidence showed Shue had stalked Mary for years, kept journals of his obsession, and even recorded parts of the captivity. He was convicted of kidnapping, murder, and assault, and sentenced to life in prison plus 40 years, where he remains today. Mary later explained that her survival came from refusing to surrender mentally. She focused on faith, courage, and keeping her daughter's spirit intact. Her story is remembered not only as a tale of endurance, but as the case that ended the life of young Jason Wilkman, an innocent bystander forever tied to this tragedy. On January 1, 2002, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 13-year-old Alicia Kozakiewicz left home to meet someone she thought was a teenage friend from the internet. In reality, the person was 38-year-old Scott Tyree, who had spent months building false trust with her online. He took her to Virginia and kept her hidden. Alicia later said she feared she would not survive past the weekend. Her rescue began with an anonymous tip that reached the FBI. Investigators traced Tyree's internet activity to Herndon, Virginia, and quickly obtained a federal warrant. On January 4, 2002, just 3 days after she disappeared, FBI agents and local police stormed Tyree's townhouse. Inside, they found Alicia alive and brought her to safety. The raid was recorded on police cameras, capturing the moment she was freed. Tyree was arrested and later sentenced to 19 years in federal prison. After his release in 2020, he was placed under strict supervision with GPS monitoring. Alicia's case became one of the earliest widely known examples of online luring. As an adult, she testified before Congress, warning, "The internet can be deadly." She went on to found the Alicia Project, which works to raise awareness about online safety and protect children. Whose crimes make your skin crawl the most? Comment below.